Hey guys, I want to take just a couple of minutes here and talk about Module 2 and the writing assignment for Module 2 in the Community Risk Reduction course. I realize I've read through the directions, and it's one of those times when I know what I'm talking about, but then you read it from somebody else's perspective and they look at it and say, what is she talking about? So I wanted to kind of just lay some foundation for you and give you a little bit of information about the expectation. When we're talking about doing risk reduction, one of the things that I hope that you've realized by now is it's targeted, it's focused, it's specific to a community or to a particular risk. And when we talk about what that risk is, we may be able to say, oh, I want to do a project or on problem X, whatever problem X is that you decide you want to do it on. Well, what if that's not a problem in your community? What if you say, well, I want to do something in this subdivision or with this school? What if that's not a problem area in your community? And it's not saying that the work in that area is bad or wrong or anything like that. It's just that when we are looking at our own communities, and when I say community, it could be something as small as the first due of your station. In many, especially larger departments, when we talk about community, we're not talking about their whole jurisdiction. We're just talking about a very small piece of that. It could be your entire city or town or neighborhood, but it's what is happening. We want to look at what is happening, to whom it's happening to, and where it's happening. And if it's not happening, what is the potential risk that it could happen? So that's what this community risk assessment piece is. And community risk assessments are, they can be very broad, very broad. This one I'm not expecting to be quite so broad, but I've given you several pieces of the puzzle. And I'm looking up here at my computer so that I can read you some of these things that I am looking at. So the first part of this assignment, to write a community analysis, identifying the hazards and risks affecting the community members. What are the demographics of your community? What are some high hazard areas or target hazards within your community? So what we're looking at there is kind of conducting that community inventory. We've all talked about target hazards, places like schools, hospitals, um, nursing homes, nursing facilities, those kinds of places can be target hazards. You may have other areas in your community, a tank farm. You might have a nuclear power plant in your community or something like that that gives rise to an increased risk because of its very presence. Maybe you've never had a problem there, but you could. And what we want to determine is, what's that probability of something happening there? I gave you the information about the American Fact Finder, and that helps you figure out who is in your community. Someone asked if I'm looking for charts in our community, in this community analysis, and not necessarily. Charts are great, but I've also seen papers where people just put charts in there, and it didn't really tell me anything. I need you to tell me, what does that chart mean to you? What is the information saying to you with what you know about high-risk audiences or what we're going to learn? People that do live in substandard housing, people that do have lower income, people that are 65 or older, people with disabilities, people that don't speak English or speak another language at home. All of those things that I talked about in that tutorial in the American Fact Finder. Also under that tab, you will find a document from Vision 2020 that is conducting a community risk assessment, a guide for conducting this. Very extensive. And as I told someone, I don't necessarily want that. But it gives you a good idea of the information that goes into that kind of a project. And then so you got to kind of figure out, when we're talking about community risk, basically there's two things we talk about. people and risks data, the kind of that kind of information. So we have to figure out what is a risk and what is a hazard. And the risk is the hazard's there. What is the risk to the people? And there's some information for you there about different types of hazards. And I will see if there's some more that I can add to that just for your own information. And then defining acceptable levels of risk. This is, to me, the real crux of the matter. What is it that people in the community are willing to pay in to reduce the risk or to minimize the risk, to prevent the risk? And one of the things that we have to, that's been the subject of the discussion for this particular unit. One of the things we have to look at is, and it's been said, if people aren't aware of the risk or their danger from the risk, then they are not going to be willing to put a lot of money into that risk or resources or whatever. So, it's kind of like they used to say about putting up a traffic light versus a stop sign. There's a certain number of people that need to die at this intersection before they put up a traffic light. To me, that, and that's what they're talking about, is an acceptable level of risk. And so we have to, when we're looking at this, we want to try to determine what the risk is. If we have target hazards in our community, let's say we have a tank farm, liquid propane. You might have to do a little research to determine what is the risk. How many calls have we run there? Has there ever been, what in their history, has there been an issue at the tank farm? What sort of suppression equipment do they have? Are we trained for this? Are we prepared for this as a fire service or emergency responders? So that is where this whole concept of acceptable level of risk, and again, I'm going to see if I can find some more information that you can use as reference material. Again, I know you probably don't want any more to do, but just to explain this, because this is, to me, the crux of it. And one of your classmates was talking about public health and that it's a proven point in public health. There's like 6 factors. People need to know the risk exists. They have to believe that they're at risk. They have to understand that the level of risk, how serious is this risk? What is the impact going to be of this risk? They have to understand that they can do something about the risk level, meaning being prepared or changing behaviors or whatever the situation might be. And so what is an acceptable level of risk when we're talking about life and death? And so that's really what, it's almost in some ways not a fire service question, but that's one of the things that we are looking at in this particular module. And then when you begin to assess the risk, and this is where I believe Gordon Graham, if you've never watched Gordon Graham before, he's kind of hilarious. But he does this high risk, low frequency type of conversation. And he does it in terms of fire service training as far as what we need to be training for. But to me, the concept is applicable at high risk, low frequency, high risk, high frequency. That may be where we need to focus. I'm drawing in the air, I realize. That may be where we need to focus our risk reduction efforts. What is the frequency? What is the risk? We can look at, that if we're talking about, say, a hospital, how many fires do you have at the hospital? The risk is high, but the frequency is low. And so this low, medium, high on this scale helps you to be able to understand that. So you have to kind of understand some of your priorities. There's a risk matrix that's in there as well. Again, looking at the probability and how you can rate things that you have listed as possible risk in your community. Some that are on this sheet: wildland fire, conflagration, civil disturbance, tornado, flood, hurricane, earthquake, volcano, those kinds of things. And they don't have to all be natural disasters or big disasters like that. Structure fires, residential fires, vehicle crashes, and those kinds of things that are more common to our community. What's the risk and what's the danger? So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about establishing priorities. And then let's see. Then once you have figured out what your high is, your high frequency, your high risk, or you want to look at that and create some risk reduction goals. And under that tab in the course site, you have some information about the creating risk reduction goals. And again, they're like any other goals. You want it to be specific. If we are going to look at cooking fires, which this example does here, we want to reduce the occurrence of cooking fires. So we want to make sure that by how much, by how many, and what's the time frame in that. So you want to make sure that you get specific with those things. And then some objectives of how you're going to do that, what is going to be done, and who is going to do it. Again, this will make more sense as we carry on through the rest of the course. Get something on paper now, and then we'll kind of weed through it. We'll kind of look at it and tweak it, and you can, as you go on, you'll be able to figure it out. It's kind of hard to put it all in there at one particular time. And then, so then when you create your risk reduction goals and objectives. So what is it that you want to do in your community? You've looked at the people, you've looked at the issues, the risk issues. Maybe they're not very large. When we're talking about sources of information for our target hazards, this is our INFIRS reports, vehicles, vehicle crashes, medical calls. Maybe you've got a large older adult population in your community and they're falling down. Or maybe you have a lot of younger children in your community that are setting fires because they don't know any better. Maybe you're in a community where there's a lot of fire deaths and nobody has working smoke alarms. So, you have to look at those things. Maybe there's this one part of town where you have gone to constantly. The one community, maybe it's an apartment complex, maybe it's a neighborhood. And this is where you want to focus your efforts. One of the reasons we do this targeted and focused approach is because we can't be everywhere at the same time. We can't work on every risk issue. We just don't have the personnel. We don't have the funding. We don't have the ability to do that. And as we go on through the course, we're going to talk more about getting partners and working with in partnerships. And we're going to set some, I'm not even wanting you to decide how you're going to accomplish these things yet. If your goal is to reduce the number of cooking fires in the XYZ apartment complex, that's all we need right now. We're going to get into how you're going to accomplish that later. I don't want to hear, we don't need right now, I don't want to know how you're going to do it. I just want to know what it is that's on your radar of what you want to do in your community. And that's what this is, this community risk assessment, designing some objectives for those high risk areas, those high frequency hazards. What is your goal and objective? But the next module gets into how you're going to accomplish this. And there's a lot of tools in the toolbox for you to be able to do that. So kind of stop right there. Basically, I'm looking at a risk issue that you want to target and perhaps a population. It may be that, the 19 to 40-year-olds, because that's a big issue in many communities because they're multitasking or whatever the situation. Maybe DUIs are a big problem. Someone in their discussion board, I can't remember if it was this class or another one, talked about teen drivers and that had been a problem in their community, and they targeted it, and it's working. So think about those things. If you have any more questions about this piece, again, you're going to come out of this course with a risk reduction plan that's going to have all these different pieces put together. We're just not waiting to the end to do it, but you'll be able to go back and tweak a lot of these things before we turn in that final plan, and to make sure that you're on the right track. That's all I want. I want to make sure that you're on the right track. And anything that I can do to enhance that, please let me know. If you have any other questions or comments, again, email me. Calling sometime is hard, and I recognize that. So just drop me an email, and I'll get back with you just as soon as I can. Thanks so much, and y'all have a great day.